Hello everyone and welcome back to your worst nightmare YouTube channel. To help us feel even more connected as a community, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are watching from. If you would like to share some of your horror encounter, do well to email us through the description of this video. Don't forget to smash the like and subscribe button. Thanks. Now, back to today's episode. I was looking for a second-hand TV. You know, the big kind, but not too expensive. I just moved into a new apartment, and I was trying to save money. So, naturally, I scrolled through Facebook Marketplace for something within my budget. And there it was, a 65-inch flat-screen TV in excellent condition for $150. Seemed like a fair price. The seller's name was Derek. No profile picture, no reviews, but the listing was fresh, and he'd responded to my message within minutes. He said the TV was less than a year old and in perfect working condition. He just needed to get rid of it because he was moving out of state. All pretty standard, right? He gave me an address not too far from my place and asked if I could come by that evening. That's where it started to get a little weird. When I pulled up to the address, the house looked off. It wasn't run down or anything, just empty. No lights on, no cars in the driveway, and the grass in the front yard was a little too long, like no one had been around for a while. I figured maybe he was in the process of moving, so I parked and messaged him to let him know I'd arrived. He texted back immediately, "Come around back." The front door sticks, so we use the back entrance. Okay, sure, why not? I mean, people have quirky houses. I wasn't about to judge. So, I walked down the side of the house, where the path was overgrown, and found the back door slightly ajar. There was this faint smell in the air, something like damp wood and decay, but I tried to brush it off as just the house being old. I knocked lightly, pushing the door open a bit, and called out, "Hey, Derek. It's me. I'm here for the TV." Silence. A flickering light from what looked like the basement was the only sign of life. I should have turned around and left right then. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out, but my dumb self was thinking, it's just a TV. You're overreacting. I called out again. Derek. Still no answer. I stood there in the kitchen, looking at the basement door, trying to decide if I should just leave. But then I heard it, a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. From the basement. Then a low grunt. I froze. Derek? I repeated, my voice cracking. Nothing. I was done. There wasn't enough cheap electronics in the world to make me stay in that house another minute. I turned on my heel, about to bolt out the back door when a man appeared in the doorway to the basement. He was tall, thin, and dirty, like he hadn't showered in weeks. His clothes were torn, and his eyes, there was something wrong with his eyes. They were wide, unblinking, as if he hadn't slept in days. Derek? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Just stood there, staring at me with this unnerving intensity. Then, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, more like the kind you see in horror movies right before the killer makes their move. You still want the TV? He asked, his voice raspy. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Every nerve in my body was on edge. My mouth was dry, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I should have run. I should have bolted out the door, but for some reason, my feet were glued to the floor. I think I'm good, man, I stammered, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. His grin widened. You sure? It's right down here in the basement. That's when I noticed it. Blood. There was a smear of blood on his shirt, barely visible in the dim light, but it was there. Fresh. I gotta go, I mumbled, taking a step backward toward the door. And that's when I heard it, a muffled cry from the basement. A voice, weak and panicked, pleading, "Please, help." My blood turned to ice. I spun around and sprinted for the back door, my heart racing, my mind screaming that I had just walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. Behind me, I heard Derek laugh. Not a normal laugh, but a deep, guttural, almost animalistic sound. It echoed through the house as I tore through the backyard and didn't stop running until I was back in my car, locking the doors. I sat there, panting, staring at the house. The laughter had stopped, but the door was still open, swinging slightly in the breeze. I didn't know what to do. Call the cops. What would I even say? "Hi, I'm here to buy a TV from Facebook Marketplace, and now I think there's a serial killer in the basement." In the end, I drove away. I didn't look back, but the whole thing haunted me for weeks. I checked the news every day, expecting to see a report of a body found at that address, or maybe a missing person. But nothing. No news. No arrests. The house eventually disappeared from the listings, and Derek's profile vanished as if he'd never existed. To this day, I don't know what I walked into. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was something worse. But I learned one thing for sure: never, ever trust a deal that seems too good to be true. Especially on Facebook Marketplace. Oh, and the kicker. I ended up buying a TV from Best Buy the next week. Full price. Worth every penny. I wanted a new dining table. Not new, but something vintage, you know. The kind of table that says, "I've got style, but I'm also responsible with my money." So I did what anyone in my position would do. I hit up Facebook Marketplace. After all, it's where you find hidden gems, right? Or at least, that's what I thought. Scrolling through listings of overpriced IKEA knockoffs and tables that looked like they'd seen more spills than a frat house floor, I found it. A beautiful oak dining table with intricate carvings. The picture showed it sitting in a cozy, sunlit room, looking like it was plucked straight out of some high-end catalog. And the price? $100. I thought I hit the jackpot. The seller, someone named Marjorie, responded to my message almost instantly, saying she was looking to downsize and just needed it gone ASAP. She lived about 30 minutes away, so I figured, why not? When I arrived at her house, it was quiet. Picture perfect, really. White picket fence, flowers blooming in the garden, and one of those tiny mailboxes that you only see in movies. I walked up to the front door, and Marjorie, this sweet old lady in her 60s, opened it with a smile. "Hello there, dear," she said, her voice all warm and grandmotherly. "You must be here for the table." "Yep, that's me," I said, glancing past her into the house. It was just as charming as the outside: antique furniture, porcelain figurines, the whole 9 yards. She led me to the dining room, and there it was, the table in all its glory, just as stunning as the pictures. Maybe even more so. But, of course, there was a catch. "I'll help you load it into your car," she said with a sweet smile. "But there's just one thing." Here we go, I thought. She's going to up the price or tell me there's a crack in it. "The table comes with a set of chairs," she continued. "But they're, well, let's just say, they're special." "Special?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Marjorie nodded, still smiling, but now there was something off about it. "They've got a bit of history. You see, they belonged to my late husband, Earl. He was very attached to them. Very attached. Now, I don't know about you, but when an elderly woman starts talking about her late husband's attachment to furniture, it raises a few red flags. But hey, I was committed to this table, so I asked, "What do you mean, attached?" She chuckled softly, though it sounded more like a nervous laugh. "Well, he spend a lot of time in them. He was a big fan of sitting. Okay. Sure. We've all got hobbies. So, are they in the garage or something? I asked, ready to move on and get this transaction over with. Her smile faltered a bit. Oh no, dear. They're still in the dining room. Right over there. I looked around the room. There were only 2 chairs pulled up to the table. One looked fine. The other was occupied by what I can only describe as a suspiciously Earl-shaped indentation in the cushion. I'll take the table, but I think I'll pass on the chairs, I said, trying to sound polite while making a mental note to burn some sage when I got home. Oh, but Earl wouldn't like that, she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. He was very particular about those chairs. You see, no one sat in that chair since he passed. I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling like I was in one of those creepy movies where the old lady turns out to be a witch or something. Right. Well, maybe I could just take the table. No, dear, she said, shaking her head. It's a package deal. The table and the chairs. Earl wouldn't have it any other way. Now, here's the thing. I've had some weird experiences on Facebook Marketplace before, but never once have I been guilt-tripped by a ghost. I mean, who was I to argue with the lingering spirit of Earl and his beloved chairs? Reluctantly, I agreed. What was I going to do? Tell her I didn't want her haunted furniture and hurt her feelings. It was just a chair. What could go wrong? So, we loaded the table and chairs into my car. Well, I loaded them. Marjorie just stood there, watching me with that unnerving smile, waving as I drove away. I felt uneasy the whole ride home, but I figured it was just the weirdness of the situation getting to me. I got home, set up the table and chairs in my dining room, and tried to forget about it. Except I couldn't. Every time I walked past the dining room, I felt watched. And let me tell you, it wasn't by my nice, non-Earl chair. It was that other one, the one with the suspicious Earl imprint. At first, I tried to ignore it. But then, strange things started happening. I'd hear creaking sounds in the middle of the night, like someone shifting in their seat. The chair would somehow always be pulled out from the table, even though I'd pushed it in. One night, I swear, I heard a sigh, like an old man who just sat down after a long day. I'm not saying it was haunted, but okay, it was definitely haunted. One morning, I walked into the dining room, and the chair had moved all the way across the room, facing the window. Like Earl wanted to enjoy the view or something. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but when I found a half-empty bottle of beer sitting next to the chair one night, and I live alone, by the way, I knew it was time to let Earl go. The next morning, I loaded the chair into my car, drove to the nearest thrift store, and donated it. I didn't even ask for a receipt. I just wanted it gone. And the table still looks great in my dining room. Just, minus one chair. Be careful what you buy on Facebook Marketplace. You might get more than you bargained for, including an old man who just doesn't know when to leave. Let me tell you about the time I almost got arrested for a coffee table. Yeah, you heard that right. A coffee table. It started off innocent enough. I had just moved into a new apartment and was on the hunt for some cheap furniture. You know how it is. Moving is expensive, and I didn't exactly have fancy decor money. So, I turned to Facebook Marketplace, where every deal looks either too good to be true or like it's about to collapse in a pile of junk. After scrolling through way too many listings, I found it, a sleek, modern coffee table for only $50. The description read, like new. Barely used. Must sell ASAP. The seller's name was Jake, and his profile pic was just a selfie of him wearing sunglasses indoors, which should have been my first red flag. But I was desperate for a coffee table, and it was the right size for my tiny living room. I messaged him, and he responded right away, super friendly. He gave me his address, but here's where it got weird. He didn't offer to help load the table into my car, and he insisted I come late in the evening, like 10 p.m. That should have been my second red flag, but I was like, hey, maybe the guy works late or something. So, I agreed. I mean, it's just a coffee table, right? Fast forward to that night. I pulled up to Jake's place, which turned out to be a massive, creepy warehouse on the outskirts of town. I double-checked the address, thinking I must have put it in wrong, but nope, I was in the right place. There were no cars, no lights, nothing. Just this huge, looming building that looked like the setting of every horror movie ever. Still, I convinced myself it was fine. Maybe the coffee table was stored here, or Jake ran a furniture business on the side. Who was I to judge? I mean, I was the idiot showing up at a warehouse at 10 p.m. for a coffee table. I parked, got out of the car, and called Jake. He answered on the first ring, his voice sounding way too cheerful for someone in this sketchy setting. "Oh hey, you're here. Just come around back," he said. "The front door's locked, but the back is open." Classic. I walked around the building, my footsteps echoing off the walls, and found a small metal door propped open with a brick. I poked my head inside. Jake? Down here. His voice echoed from somewhere deep inside the warehouse. I should have left right then and there, but no, I kept going. Because, apparently, when faced with every sign of imminent danger, my survival instincts are no match for a good deal on furniture. I walked inside, and it was exactly what I feared: dark, dusty, and filled with piles of random junk. The kind of place where if you scream, no one hears you. Or worse, where you become the scream. As I made my way deeper into the building, I heard movement. Something shuffled nearby, and my stomach dropped. "Jake." I called out again, my voice a little shaky now. Finally, I saw him. He was standing next to a big, bulky object covered by a dirty sheet. He waved at me like we were old friends. "Hey, you made it." Yeah, I said, glancing around. "So, where's the coffee table?" He grinned, that kind of grin people wear when they're about to offer you something you really don't want. He pulled the sheet off, and there it was, a coffee table, or at least, what used to be one. The thing was barely recognizable. The legs were wobbly, the glass top was cracked, and there were stains. I'm talking stains that no amount of scrubbing was going to fix. I blinked. "Is this it?" "Yup." He beamed. "It's got character, doesn't it?" "Yeah, if by character you mean it looks like it survived a bar fight," I mumbled under my breath. Jake didn't seem to notice my lack of enthusiasm. He went on about how it was a conversation piece and how people just don't appreciate old-world craftsmanship anymore. Meanwhile, I was just staring at the stains and wondering if I could catch tetanus from a coffee table. But then came the kicker. I pulled out my phone, ready to bail, when a cop car pulled up outside. Lights flashing and everything. I froze. What was happening? I hadn't even touched the table yet. Jake's face went pale. You should probably go." "What? Why?" I asked, glancing between him and the cop car. "Look, this is a misunderstanding. I was just, borrowing the table from my ex's house." I stared at him, wide-eyed. "Wait, this isn't your table." Before I could process any more, the cop got out of the car and started walking toward us. Jake grabbed the coffee table and pushed it toward me. "Just take it. Go. Go." I don't know why, but in that moment, I panicked. I grabbed the table, or what was left of it, and made a break for my car. I was halfway to the parking lot when I realized I was now a getaway driver with a busted coffee table as my only loot. I threw the table in the trunk after trying and failing to fit it without breaking it more and sped off, my heart racing. In my rearview mirror, I saw Jake being escorted to the cop car. Great, I thought. Now I'm an accessory to something. Grand theft coffee table. I drove home, dumped the table on the curb, and swore off Facebook Marketplace forever. Well, for at least a week. The temptation of cheap furniture is strong. So yeah, that's how I nearly got arrested for a coffee table. Always ask more questions before agreeing to meet someone in a creepy warehouse. Oh, and never trust a guy named Jake wearing sunglasses indoors. I learned that one the hard way. So, I've been wanting a vintage bike for a while. You know, one of those old school ones with the basket on the front, the kind you see in romantic comedies where the girl rides through the park and nothing bad ever happens. I thought it would be cool to have one, maybe add some charm to my weekend rides. So, naturally, I hit up Marketplace. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a mint green, 1950s style bike with a wicker basket and a bell. The seller's name was Rick, and his listing said, "Need some work, but still rides." Need some work should have been the red flag, but I ignored it. I messaged Rick, and he replied almost immediately. "Yeah, it's still available. I'm in the middle of a move, so I just need it gone." He gave me an address about 45 minutes away, in a part of town I wasn't super familiar with. But again, I ignored my better judgment because, hey, vintage bike. So I set off. When I got there, I knew something was off. Rick's house was one of those dilapidated, run-down places where the lawn is half dead and there's an old mattress propped up against the porch. But Rick himself, total opposite. He was this cheerful, middle-aged guy in a Hawaiian shirt, sipping on a can of beer like he didn't have a care in the world. "Hey," he called out as I pulled up. "You here for the bike?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yep, that's me." "Great," he said, taking a swig of his beer. "It's out back." "Follow me." Out back. Why was it always out back? He led me through his yard, which was basically just a graveyard of broken appliances and rusted metal. I was pretty sure I saw a washing machine from the 80s half buried in the dirt. But I kept following him because I'd already come this far, right? When we reached the bike, I stopped dead in my tracks. Now, let me paint you a picture. The bike looked like it had survived several apocalypses. The mint green paint was peeling, the tires were completely flat, and the wicker basket was hanging on by a thread. The bell, rusted, and "need some work" didn't begin to describe the state of those pedals. They were bent at angles I didn't know were possible. I stared at the wreckage, trying to decide if I should laugh or cry. Rick, still smiling, gestured to it like he was presenting a prize on a game show. "Ain't she a beaut?" I blinked. Yeah. She's something. She's still got some miles in her," Rick said, clearly oblivious to the fact that this bike looked like it had already traveled to hell and back. "Needs a little air in the tires, maybe a new chain, and, maybe a new basket. But she rides." Rides? I wasn't sure this thing would even make it out of his yard. Trying to be polite, I asked, "So, how much work would you say it needs?" Rick shrugged. Not much, not much. Just a few tweaks here and there. I'd ride her myself, but, you know, I've got a bad knee." "Yeah, sure. Blame it on the knee, Rick." Despite every red flag waving in my face, I still wasn't ready to give up. "Can I, test it out?" "Of course," he said, beaming. "Just give her a little push, and she'll go." Now, at this point, I should have said, "Thanks, but no thanks," and walked away. But no, I was committed. So I got on the bike, ignoring the ominous creaking sound as I settled onto the seat and gave it a little push. Nothing happened. The tires were so flat that the rims were basically scraping the ground. But Rick was standing there, smiling like I was about to win the Tour de France. So I pushed harder. The bike moved about a foot before the chain snapped. Literally snapped, right off the gears, with a sound so loud it made me jump. I nearly toppled over, but managed to catch myself. Rick stared at the broken chain for a second, then back at me. "Huh," he said, scratching his head. "That's new." I stood there, straddling this hunk of metal, feeling like an absolute fool. I was about to tell him I wasn't interested anymore when he smiled and said, "Tell you what, I'll knock $10 off the price." $10. $10. This thing was worth maybe $10 total, and that was being generous. But Rick looked so proud of his offer, like he'd just done me the biggest favor in the world. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I think I'll pass, man. Thanks, though." Rick's smile faltered, just for a second, before he plastered it back on. "No worries, no worries. She'll go to a good home eventually." I politely declined again and started to make my way back to my car. As I was leaving, Rick called after me, "Hey, if you change your mind, I'll throw in the washing machine for free." I didn't respond. I just got in my car and drove away, promising myself that I would never, ever buy anything from Facebook Marketplace again. But the best part, when I got home, I checked my messages. Rick had already sent me a follow-up. "Hey, I noticed you left without the bike. I can come down another $5 if you want to come back." Needless to say, I blocked him. The moral of the story: if it looks like it survived the apocalypse, it's probably not worth the $50. Or the trip. Or the inevitable tetanus shot. It was a Tuesday, middle of the afternoon. I remember because I was supposed to be at work, but my boss was out of town, so I decided to spend my lunch break scrolling through Facebook Marketplace. You know how it goes. You're looking for nothing in particular, but the algorithm knows you better than you know yourself. And there it was, vintage leather couch, barely used. $100. The pictures made it look like a steal, a sleek, dark brown leather sectional, almost new, and the price was way too good to pass up. I messaged the seller, a guy named Eli. His profile picture was a blurry shot of what looked like him holding a fishing pole, standing next to a lake. Seemed normal enough. The listing had been up for a while, and to my surprise, he responded almost immediately. "Come by today if you want it," his message read. "Need it gone ASAP." I should have thought it was weird, his urgency. But I was excited about the deal and figured maybe he was moving or something. We agreed to meet at his house that evening after work, and he sent me the address. It was in a quiet neighborhood, about 20 minutes from mine. Perfect. When I arrived, the house looked a little rundown. Not in a creepy way, just like no one had bothered with lawn care in years. The windows were dusty, and the front door had a faint scratch mark near the handle. I knocked, feeling slightly uneasy for no good reason. Maybe I was just being paranoid because I was alone, but something about standing there on his porch just felt off. Eli answered the door, and immediately, I felt a little more relaxed. He looked normal, mid-30s, glasses, average height. He invited me in and gestured toward the couch sitting in the middle of an otherwise empty living room. It looked even better in person, so I decided to go for it. We made small talk, exchanged the money, and I arranged for a friend with a truck to help me pick it up later that night. "So, why are you getting rid of it?" I asked, trying to make conversation while we waited for my friend to show up. Just clearing things out," he said vaguely, then added with a laugh. "It's kind of a long story, honestly." "You sure you want to hear it?" I laughed nervously, hoping for some dumb anecdote about downsizing or his wife making him redecorate. But he just smiled. It belonged to my brother, Eli started, his tone shifting. He, didn't have the best luck with it. I raised an eyebrow, confused. What do you mean? He died, Eli said, bluntly. I froze, waiting for him to say he was kidding. But he didn't. His face was completely serious now. My stomach twisted, but I forced a smile, trying to laugh it off. Oh, wow, I'm sorry, man. That's rough. Eli just shrugged. Yeah, weird thing is, he wasn't the first. I blinked. The first. To die after owning the couch, Eli clarified, his eyes fixed on mine. There's been 3 others before him. All accidents. Or so they say. I stared at him, feeling the air grow thicker around me. Was he messing with me? This had to be a joke, right? You're kidding, I said, half laughing, though my heart was pounding now. Nope. You ever heard of the Devil's Chair? Eli asked casually, as if he were discussing a TV show we both liked. I shook my head. Well, it's kind of like that. Legend says anyone who sits on a cursed object, like a chair or couch, meets a bad end. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. This was ridiculous. It had to be. You're just screwing with me, right? I asked, trying to sound more amused than nervous. Eli just smiled, eerily calm. Guess you'll find out. I picked up the couch that night, and for the next couple of days, I couldn't get Eli's words out of my head. His weird little smile. His flat tone when he talked about his brother. But I figured he was just trying to freak me out for kicks. I mean, come on, a cursed couch. Ridiculous. Things were fine at first. The couch was comfortable, and it fit perfectly in my living room. But that's when things started getting weird. The first night, I fell asleep on it while watching TV. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing like I had just run a marathon. I couldn't remember much of the dream, just flashes, a dark figure standing in the corner of the room, whispering something I couldn't understand. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just a nightmare. Stress from work, maybe. But the dreams kept coming. Every night I fell asleep on that couch, I had the same eerie dream. The figure would get closer, whispering louder, but I could never make out the words. Each time, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding in my chest. Then, things got worse. One evening, while sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone, I heard something. A faint creaking noise, like footsteps. I live alone, so naturally, I thought it was just the house settling. But the creaking continued, getting louder and more deliberate. I stood up, looking around, but saw nothing. The moment I sat back down, it stopped. It didn't end there. Objects in my living room started moving. Little things at first. A book shifted an inch to the left, a picture frame tilted. I started losing track of time, too. I'd sit on the couch and suddenly hours would disappear, like I'd been in a trance. Friends would text me, and I'd forget to reply. I even started feeling this weird sense of dread every time I was near the couch, like something was watching me. The breaking point came one night when I heard the footsteps again, this time louder and more aggressive. The figure from my dreams was no longer just in my sleep. I saw it, in the corner of the room, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. I blinked, and it was gone. That's when I knew I had to get rid of the couch. I called Eli, furious. What the hell did you sell me? I demanded, pacing around my kitchen, far away from that cursed thing. His response chilled me to the bone. Oh, it's not the couch, man, he said, his voice disturbingly calm. It's you. The couch just opens the door. You should have never sat on it. And then he hung up. It all started because my blender broke. Simple as that. I was making smoothies and the thing just died. Completely burnt out. No amount of banging, shaking, or swearing at it would get the thing to turn on again. So, like any responsible adult, I took to Facebook Marketplace instead of buying a brand new one. After all, why spend $100 when I could buy a barely used one for half the price? I scrolled for a while until I found a listing. Heavy-duty industrial blender, only $30. Perfect condition. The seller's name was Janine, and her profile picture was a generic-looking cat. I figured maybe she was moving or something, so I messaged her to set up a time to pick it up. She replied quickly, saying I could swing by her place after 6 p.m. That evening, I arrived at her address, a little apartment building just outside the city. The place wasn't old, but it wasn't exactly new either. You know, that in-between vibe where it's either completely safe or you're about to walk into the start of a true crime documentary. I knocked on the door, and after a few seconds, a small woman with stringy blonde hair and glasses answered. She looked to be in her 40s, but it was hard to tell. She had this nervous energy about her, like she was expecting me to ask her something really uncomfortable. "You're here for the blender?" she asked, barely making eye contact. "Yep," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Perfect condition, right?" "Yeah, it works. Works real good. It's special," she said, scratching at her neck like she had a mosquito bite or something. I was starting to feel a little weird, but hey, $30 is $30. How picky could I be? She led me into her kitchen, where the blender sat on the counter. It looked normal. A little old-fashioned, sure, but solid. The kind of thing that looked like it could crush ice into a fine powder without breaking a sweat. I handed over the money, and she hesitated for a second before taking it. "Just be careful with it," Janine said as she handed me the blender. "Careful?" I laughed. "It's a blender, not a chainsaw." She didn't laugh. She just stared at me with those wide, anxious eyes and said, "Don't use it after midnight." That's all I'm saying. I blinked, waiting for her to crack a smile or let me in on the joke. But nope. Dead serious. I chuckled awkwardly and said, okay. Noted. I'll avoid the midnight margaritas." Janine didn't even blink. She just muttered something under her breath about consequences and bad things happening before practically shoving me out the door. I could still hear her locking like 5 deadbolts behind me as I walked away. What kind of blender was this? Now, any sane person would probably pause at a warning like that. But I'm an idiot, and I had tacos to make. I got home, plugged the thing in. The blender worked like a dream. I tossed in ice, fruit, some spinach, because I'm pretending to be healthy, and in seconds, it was a perfectly blended smoothie. No weird noises, no smoke, nothing. It was a solid blender. A deal, really. A few days went by, and I kind of forgot about Janine's weird warning. Until one night. It was a Friday, and I had some friends over. We'd had a few beers and decided we wanted to make some late-night smoothies. Don't ask me why. We were drunk and in that weird mood where anything seems like a great idea. I grabbed the blender, and that's when I saw the time, 12:07 a.m. Suddenly, Janine's voice echoed in my head, "Don't use it after midnight." But again, I'm an idiot, and in my beer-fueled logic, I thought, what's the worst that could happen? The blender turns into an alien. I laughed at myself and hit the blend button. At first, everything seemed fine. It whirred to life, smoothly blending the fruits and ice we'd thrown in. But then, it started making this weird, grinding noise. I figured maybe I'd put too much in at once, so I stopped it, opened the lid, and peeped inside. What I saw, well, it shouldn't have been possible. The ingredients weren't just blending. They were swirling in this tight, unnaturally fast spiral, like a mini tornado had formed inside the blender. And in the center of it, something black, a shadow, maybe, was forming. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd had too much to drink, but no, it was real. Suddenly, the lights in my kitchen flickered. My friends, who had been laughing and talking behind me, went dead silent. One of them, Sarah, whispered, "What the hell is that?" The black shape inside the blender grew larger, almost like it was expanding. The whirring sound got louder, higher pitched, until it was this ear-piercing screech that made my head throb. I panicked and hit the power button, but the blender wouldn't stop. The tornado inside kept spinning faster and faster, the black shape now almost filling the entire blender. Then, in a sudden burst, the thing exploded. Not the blender, thank God, but the smoothie. It sprayed everywhere, covering the walls, the counter, us. But it wasn't just a smoothie anymore. It was this thick, black sludge that stank like rotting garbage. I gagged, wiping the stuff off my face, and looked at the blender, which was now vibrating violently on the counter, like it was trying to escape. My friend, Jake, yelled, "Dude, turn it off." "I'm trying," I shouted, frantically unplugging it. The second the cord came out of the wall, the blender stopped dead, the black gunk inside sloshing ominously. For a moment, we all just stood there, staring at the thing in stunned silence. The kitchen reeked, and I felt like I'd just stepped into the middle of some kind of demonic cooking show. "What the hell was that?" Sarah asked, wiping the sludge off her arm. I didn't have an answer. But as I stood there, looking at the now quiet blender, Janine's words echoed in my head again, "Don't use it after midnight." Needless to say, I threw the blender out that night. I didn't care if it was a deal. I wasn't about to have a possessed smoothie machine in my kitchen. If someone selling you a blender tells you not to use it after midnight, maybe just listen. Or, just buy a new one from Target. I needed a lawnmower. Simple enough, right? I just moved into my new house, which had a backyard that looked like it was auditioning to be the next Amazon rainforest. Naturally, I didn't want to spend a fortune on a brand new lawnmower, so I turned to my trusty friend, Facebook Marketplace. After a bit of scrolling, I found a listing that seemed too good to be true, which, spoiler alert, it was. The ad read, "Top of the line Lawnmaster Pro Mower, $50, barely used." $50 for that kind of lawnmower. Normally, they go for $500 easy, and here I was, about to get it for the price of a tank of gas. This was the kind of deal people write articles about. The seller was named Frankie, and from his profile picture, he looked like a normal, middle-aged guy, bald, mustache, probably spent too much time talking about the glory days of his high school football team. He messaged me back pretty fast, telling me I could pick it up the same day. His house was a bit out in the sticks, think long, winding roads, more trees than people, and no cell signal for miles. Prime horror movie territory. But the weather was nice, and I figured, what's the worst that could happen? I arrived at his place in the early evening. The house was old and worn, like the kind of place you drive by and wonder if anyone still lives there. The lawn was even worse than mine. Grass waist high, old rusty car parts scattered around. As I pulled up, I saw the mower sitting by the garage, looking as shiny and new as it had in the pictures. Frankie came out to greet me, waving like I was his long-lost cousin. "You here for the mower, right?" he asked in this thick, smoker's voice. He sounded like he'd been drinking gravel for breakfast every day for the past 30 years. "Yeah," I said, trying not to let the surroundings freak me out. "Looks great for $50. He grinned, showing off a set of teeth that could definitely star in their own horror movie. "Yep, barely used it," he said, clapping me on the back a little too hard. "Thing runs like a dream." I glanced around at his overgrown yard, The kind of grass that could swallow a dog whole, and raised an eyebrow. You don't use it much. Frankie chuckled, a sound that I'm still not sure was entirely human. Nah, not much these days. Decided to get rid of it. Don't need it anymore. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me, but again, $50. I wasn't going to be picky. So, I handed him the cash, and he helped me load the mower into the back of my car. As I was about to leave, he stopped me. One thing, Frankie said, his tone suddenly serious. If you hear it running in the middle of the night, don't go outside. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But his face didn't change. No, seriously, he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice like we were in on some creepy secret together. Sometimes it runs on its own. Just don't check on it, all right? Now, I don't know about you, but when a guy selling you a lawnmower tells you it might start mowing your lawn by itself in the middle of the night, you probably shouldn't ignore him. But guess what I did? Yep. I ignored him. I just thought he was messing with me, trying to add some local legend flair to the sale. So, I smiled, nodded, and drove off, lawnmower in tow. For the first couple of days, everything was fine. I used the mower that weekend, and it worked great. Smooth ride, cut the grass like a pro. I even bragged about my awesome $50 fine to my friends, who all agreed I had scored the deal of the century. Frankie was just some eccentric guy, right? Then, a few nights later, it started. I was lying in bed around 3 a.m. when I heard it, the unmistakable hum of the lawnmower's engine. My brain, still half asleep, tried to make sense of it. There's no way, I thought. It must be a car outside or some neighbor starting up their own mower early for some ungodly reason. But as I lay there, the sound grew louder and more specific. That wasn't just a random motor, it was my mower. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. My bedroom window faced the backyard, and sure enough, there was a faint glow coming from outside, like the lawnmower's headlights were on. Heart pounding, I got out of bed and peeked through the curtains. And there it was, rolling across my yard, mowing my lawn all by itself. No one was pushing it, no remote control. It was just moving. Slowly, methodically, like it knew exactly what it was doing. For a second, I considered going outside to stop it. But then I remembered Frankie's words, don't go outside. Now, I'm not a superstitious guy, but at that moment, I decided to follow the advice of the strange man who sold me a haunted lawnmower. I watched the thing finish a perfect lap around my yard before it came to a stop right by the garage. Its headlights flickered once, then went out. The next morning, I checked the mower, expecting to find it out of gas or something, anything to explain what I'd seen. But nope. It was just sitting there, full tank, looking as innocent as a machine possibly could. This went on for a few more nights. Every time around 3 a.m., I'd hear it come to life, watch it mow the yard, and then quietly go back to its resting spot. The thing was keeping my lawn immaculate, but it was also driving me insane. I couldn't sleep knowing my mower was out there, doing God knows what. Finally, I had enough. I called Frankie, ready to demand some kind of explanation. Hey, remember me? The guy you sold the possessed lawnmower to. Frankie just laughed. Ah, she's mowing for you at night, huh? Yeah, and I'm losing my mind. What's the deal with this thing? Is it cursed? Haunted? Is there a tiny lawn-obsessed goblin living in it? Frankie sighed. Nah, no curses. It's just special. Bought it from some guy who said it came from a research facility. Experimental tech, they called it. Runs on its own, smart AI or something. Guess it still works. Smart AI. This thing's got better work ethic than I do. Frankie chuckled. Just let it do its thing. Won't bother you. He hung up, leaving me with more questions than answers. But here's the thing, I'm still using the mower. Sure, it's creepy, and yeah, it sometimes starts on its own. But you know what? My yard looks amazing. I've got the best grass in the neighborhood. So, if you ever find a deal on Facebook Marketplace that seems too good to be true, it probably is. But hey, at least my lawns never looked better. It all started because of my dumb decision to buy a refrigerator off Facebook Marketplace. I know, who buys a fridge secondhand. But hear me out. I had just moved into my new apartment, and my bank account looked like it had been attacked by a swarm of angry bees. So, I was in no position to splurge on a shiny new fridge. Instead, I went looking for a bargain. That's when I found it. Old school fridge. Works great. $50. The pictures showed one of those vintage models with the rounded edges, chrome handles, and this retro vibe that would totally give my kitchen some personality. I figured it may be a little loud, but hey, for $50. Sold. The seller was Tina, and she messaged me back quickly. Come pick it up today, or it goes to the dump, she said, which seemed a little dramatic for a perfectly functioning fridge, but I was all for a quick deal. She sent me an address, and I headed out after work. The house was way out on the edge of town, the kind of place where the streetlights get scarce, and every driveway looks like it might lead to an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. Tina's house was this old, slightly rundown ranch, the paint peeling, lawn overgrown. But hey, I wasn't there for curb appeal. I was there for the fridge. She met me at the door, looking exactly like someone who was ready to get rid of stuff and move on. Mid-50s, frazzled, like she'd been packing or maybe dealing with one too many garage sales. Without much small talk, she led me around to the back of the house, where the fridge was sitting on her porch. It looked just like the pictures, maybe a little dirtier, but solid. Heavy, too. I was admiring it when she suddenly said, "You're really doing me a favor, you know." "Oh, yeah. Moving or something?" I asked, trying to be polite. She hesitated, biting her lip. "Something like that. Just make sure you keep the door shut at night." I blinked. Okay. You mean, so it stays cold?" Tina didn't laugh. "No, I mean always. Even if it's not plugged in, keep it closed." She gave me a tight smile, like she'd just given me some insider information and wasn't planning to elaborate. Before I could ask any more questions, she helped me load it into my truck and practically shoved me off with a wave and a quick good luck. I'll admit, the weird warning bugged me the whole way home. I mean, who says something like that about a refrigerator? But I shrugged it off, figuring maybe she was just superstitious or messing with me. Besides, it was a fridge. How bad could it be? I got it home and wrestled it into my kitchen, plugging it in to see if it even worked. To my surprise, it hummed to life right away. No weird noises, no burning smells. Just cold air. Perfect. For the first couple of days, everything was fine. I stuffed it full of groceries, adjusted the settings, and told everyone about my sweet $50 deal. But then things started getting strange. One night, after I'd gone to bed, I heard this soft clicking noise coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was just the fridge doing fridge things. You know, the usual humming, defrosting, whatever. But the noise got louder. It wasn't a hum. It was more like tapping. I figured it was probably just the fridge settling in, so I ignored it and went back to sleep. But the next morning, when I went to grab some milk, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly open. Not wide open, just cracked. "Great," I muttered, thinking I'd been careless and left it ajar. I shut it tightly and went about my day, but that night, the tapping came back. This time, it was louder. More insistent. I dragged myself out of bed and headed to the kitchen, half expecting to find the fridge leaking or the compressor broken. Instead, I found the door open again. I became annoyed and shut it harder this time, making sure it latched properly. The next morning, the door was open. Again. At this point, I started getting creeped out. I wasn't leaving it open. I knew that much. And this wasn't the kind of fridge that just pops open by itself. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the seal was old. Maybe I had too much stuff inside and it wasn't closing all the way. But no matter how careful I was, every night, the door would crack open. After a week of this nonsense, I decided to investigate. I set up my phone to record overnight, figuring I'd catch whatever mechanical issue was causing the door to pop open. I went to bed feeling like a detective, ready to bust my fridge for bad behavior. What I saw the next morning made me wish I'd never hit record. The footage started normal enough. The kitchen was quiet. The fridge sat there like any normal appliance. But around 2 a.m., something changed. The tapping started, faint at first, then louder. And then the door moved. Not like it was pushed by air or like someone on the inside was pushing it open. My heart raced as I watched the door slowly creak open, just a few inches, before stopping. And then the light inside the fridge flickered and something moved. Something inside the fridge. I paused the video, my hands shaking. I couldn't tell what it was. Maybe a shadow, maybe my imagination, but something was definitely there, just out of sight. I rewound it again, trying to catch a better look, but the video cut off right after the door opened. I slammed the fridge shut, cursing under my breath, and immediately went to unplug it. But before I could pull the plug, there was a loud bang from inside the fridge. The door rattled like something was trying to get out. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I grabbed the duct tape and wrapped it around the door, sealing it shut like I was preparing for the fridge apocalypse. For good measure, I pushed a chair against it. I wasn't taking any chances. That night, I slept with one eye open, convinced I was about to be attacked by the world's first haunted kitchen appliance. In the morning, the tape was still intact, and the door hadn't budged. I called my cousin, Greg, who's one of those DIY guys who thinks he can fix anything. He came over, looked at the fridge, and listened to my whole story while trying, and failing, not to laugh. So, what, you think there's, like, a demon in your crisper drawer? Greg chuckled, tapping the side of the fridge. Just help me get rid of it, I groaned. It's either possessed or trying to kill me, and I'm not in the mood to find out which. We hauled the fridge outside and left it by the curb with a free sign slapped on it. I figured it wouldn't last long. People love free stuff, even cursed appliances, apparently. Sure enough, by the next morning, it was gone. Some poor soul had taken it off my hands. I could only hope they weren't going to make the same mistake I did. Now, I've got a brand new fridge from the store, one with no weird warnings or possessed tendencies. Never ever buy a fridge for $50 from a woman who tells you to keep the door shut. Because whatever's inside, you don't want it getting out. Also, I've officially switched to using a cooler. Sleep paralysis is terrifying enough on its own, but when you throw Facebook Marketplace into the mix, things go from bad to, why didn't I just shop at Target really fast? I know this because I found out the hard way. It all started when I decided I needed a new bed frame. My old one was making this awful creaking noise every time I sleep, and I was sure it was only a matter of time before it collapsed and I'd be sleeping on the floor like a sad college student again. So, naturally, I turned to Facebook Marketplace, thinking I could find a good deal, which was my mistake number one. I came across this listing for a vintage, hand-carved bed frame for $75. The pictures made it look pretty cool, like something out of an old-timey mansion. The seller, Lydia, seemed normal enough, and she mentioned she was selling it because she was redecorating her guest room. Totally innocent, right? Plus, she lived nearby, so I could pick it up the same day. Perfect. I messaged Lydia, and she responded quickly, "Sure, you can come by tonight. But I have to warn you, it's a little old." "No problem. I like the charm of old furniture, and $75 for a full bed frame." I was in. So I drove over to her place that evening. When I pulled up, her house looked like something straight out of a historical drama, big, creaky, and probably filled with more antiques than people. Lydia was a small, older woman, maybe in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and a weirdly intense smile. She greeted me at the door like she'd been waiting for hours, which was strange a bit. But hey, she was nice enough, so I followed her inside. The bed frame was even more impressive in person. Beautifully carved wood, tall headboard, perfect for relaxation. I almost couldn't believe she was letting it go for so cheap. "Why are you selling this?" I asked, half expecting her to say she was moving or needed the space. Lydia hesitated. "Well, let's just say it doesn't fit with the rest of the house anymore." Odd, but whatever. People redecorate all the time. She helped me load the bed frame into my car, and as I was about to leave, she gave me a strange look. "You'll want to sleep on it right away," she said. I blinked, confused. "Sleep on it right away." "Tonight," she clarified. "Trust me. You'll understand." I laughed awkwardly and drove off, telling myself it was just an old lady being spooky. But something about her tone made my skin crawl a little. Still, a bed frame is a bed frame. How bad could it be? When I got home, I set up the bed frame in my room and admired it. It looked perfect, exactly the kind of vintage, Pinterest-worthy setup I had in mind. Feeling accomplished, I threw my mattress on it and decided to go to bed early. It had been a long day, after all. That's when the fun began. I fell asleep pretty easily, which isn't typical for me. But a few hours later, I woke up. Or, at least, I thought I woke up. My eyes opened, and I could see my room clearly, the dim light from the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. But something was wrong. I couldn't move. My first thought was, oh great, sleep paralysis. Fantastic. This wasn't my first encounter with sleep paralysis, but usually it stops pretty quickly. I just remind myself that I can't move, can't scream, and wait for it to pass. But this time, something was different. I could feel something heavy on my chest, like a pressure, and the room felt wrong. Like off in some way I couldn't quite explain. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking around the bed. At this point, my brain was screaming, it's just sleep paralysis. Nothing's actually there. But my heart wasn't listening. The footsteps kept getting closer, and then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a shadow, tall and thin, just barely visible in the dim light, standing at the foot of the bed. Now, normally, with sleep paralysis, you might see shadow figures. They're not real, just your brain playing tricks on you. But this thing wasn't your run-of-the-mill shadow person. It moved, slowly, like it was studying me. Watching. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as this shadowy figure came closer. It leaned over me, its face, or what should have been its face, hovering inches from mine. My chest tightened, and I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like something bad was about to happen. Like, really bad. Then, it spoke. "I see you," it whispered, its voice like a breath of cold air. At that moment, I panicked internally. My brain was going into full meltdown mode. Sleep paralysis figures don't talk. They're not supposed to talk. This wasn't how it worked. The figure lingered for what felt like forever, then slowly backed away, disappearing into the shadows of the room. And just like that, I could move again. I shot up in bed, gasping for air, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The room was quiet, empty. No shadow figure, no creepy whispers. Just me, sitting in my dark bedroom, feeling like I had just lived through the worst nightmare of my life. But here's the kicker. When I looked down at the bed frame, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were scratches, deep scratches, on the wooden headboard. Fresh ones, like something had clawed at it. I grabbed my phone and called Lydia. She answered after a couple of rings, like she'd been expecting the call. "You slept on it, didn't you?" she asked, her voice calm. "What the hell is wrong with this bed?" I demanded, still trying to catch my breath. Lydia sighed. "I tried to warn you. The bed frame belonged to my late husband. He had issues with sleep. He used to see things at night. After he passed, well, I've had my own troubles. Sleep paralysis." I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes," she said softly. "The bed seems to attract it. I don't know why, but once you sleep in it, it starts happening more often. You see things, hear things. It's as if the bed pulls them closer." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "So, what? I'm just supposed to deal with this forever?" "Well," Lydia said, her voice oddly chipper now. I figured it was someone else's turn. I hung up. I wasn't about to let some haunted bed frame ruin my life. So the next morning, I did the only thing I could think of. I put it right back up on Facebook Marketplace. Vintage bed frame, $50. Must pick up today. Within an hour, I had a buyer. Some guy named Steve messaged me, excited about the great deal. I didn't mention the whole sleep paralysis thing. I figured Steve would figure it out soon enough. Remember, if someone's selling a nice piece of furniture for way cheaper than it should be, there's probably a catch. And that catch might be a creepy shadow figure that talks to you in the middle of the night. But hey, at least my room looks great without that bed frame.